I'm here today to talk to you about Temple University's Employee Manual. Isn't that exciting? I know. You're thrilled. You say, wait a minute. Somebody's going to talk to us about policies and procedures and things that we have to do. Unfortunately, that's my job, but fortunately, I love what I do. So hopefully that's going to come across to you. Temple University has an employee manual, and now because you are teaching assistant and graduate assistants, there are provisions of that manual that now apply to you. We wanted to share those with you. So, you want me to turn that on? I'm not sure it's okay. They're filming me, so now I have to turn that on. All right. So I wanted to say that this manual, we used to print in paper, but now what we've done is we've decided to go sustainable. So I'm going to give you a website. It's www.temple.edu/HR. And that is the website where there's a link to this manual that I'm going to be discussing for about the next 30 minutes. I'm going to be cramming a lot of information to a really short period of time. Hopefully we'll be able to do that. So, top 10 reasons to read this manual, just in case you didn't think of enough reasons already, are number 10, because we're revising it, so soon there'll be a new edition. So get it, because you want to have the collector's item, right? You want to have read the original, the first edition, all right? All new faculty and staff are reading it, and of course you don't want to feel left out, because if you're going to be working for tenure or non-tenure track faculty in schools and colleges, you don't want to not be up to speed on the employee manual that they're reading. Absolutely. You want to be able to engage in that conversation. There is no short version of it, so you might as well read the long one on the HR website, okay? Absolutely. Where else can you find the university's mission statement? It's actually a very well-kept secret. Temple has a mission, and that mission statement is in the employee manual. And you find out everything you wanted to know about Russell Conwell and Temple University's history. And that's some really, actually the history of Temple is quite interesting, quite fascinating. If you ever get a chance to hear a man by the name of Jim Hilty, who was formerly the dean of Ambler College, or then became the Ambler campus, he's written a book that's about the history of Temple University. Take the opportunity to see Jim Hilty speak, because he is really the resident expert on Temple history, and it's quite fascinating. Some other great reasons are many of the sections of this manual do apply to you. Also, you should know that some of you in this room, your position is covered under what is the Temple University Graduate Student Association. So in addition to getting to know the provisions of the manual that apply to you, you will also get a copy of something called a collective bargaining agreement or a union contract, because TUGSA bargains with the university for your interests if your position is covered by that. And you get to learn about things like, tells you, it really starts, the structure of the table of contents says, if you were to land on this earth and you never before had ever heard of Temple University, it gives you a little history, tells you where we came from. It introduces the manual. It talks about, starts from the beginning of your career at Temple and takes you all the way through what you would do if you ever wanted to leave Temple, which we hope that doesn't happen, okay? All right. Finally, it explains the importance of completing certain documentation that pays you. That's important documentation to complete. Would you agree? Absolutely. So you must complete something called a W-4 that tells us what taxes we should take out of your pay. You should also complete something called an I-9. That's a form that says you're eligible to work in the United States. Both of these things and all that information is included in the manual, as well as some additional documents for foreign nationals. And it also mentions that Temple pays every single person that it does pay via direct deposit. So the way that, and the reason is that Temple considers that the safest and most convenient and also the quickest way to get you your money when you get paid. Has everybody signed up for direct deposit? If you have not, you can do so through the TU portal, and you click on Staff Tools, and it takes you so that you can sign up or you can enroll online in direct deposit. And you can put in the information like the routing number for your bank and so forth and the correct account number. The only time that you might ever receive a paycheck from Temple University is if Temple does something called pre-noting, meaning you give us the number of your bank and the account numbers, and they say, okay, let's do a test run. Let's make sure that Eric gave us the right numbers, so we're going to make sure that when we deposit that money, it's going to Eric Brunner's account, pre-noting. If you are due to get paid before the pre-noting process happens, then you might get a paycheck. But that's the only time you will get a paycheck. In fact, you will never get anything on paper that says you've been paid. You will get an email from payroll that says there's been activity on your account. So you log in to the TU portal through the link that's on the email, and that takes you. You click on the staff tools, and then you go to your pay stub. And that pay stub view, it will list all your pay stubs for an extended period of time. Great when you're applying for a loan. They ask you for 3 copies of pay stubs. You don't have to run around your house looking for 3 copies in your drawers. You click onto the TU portal, you sign in to your secure TU portal site, and then you can see copies of your pay stub. So that's about pay. Also, many of you in the room, if you are new to Temple, new to the area, you should know that there is some incentive for you to be a customer of PNC Bank. No obligation, just an offer. There's a full-service branch on main campus on Leocoris Walk, so if you're new to the area and you'd like to establish a relationship with a local bank, you can do that. Walk into the branch, introduce yourself. The branch manager and also the assistant vice president, Eric Glenn, will go out of his way to make you a customer if you so choose. No obligation, but an offer. There's also a branch of the Philadelphia Federal Credit Union in the lower level of the Student Center if you choose to use a credit union instead of a bank. Great things to learn. Now, there are some other great reasons. This does explain your rights and responsibilities regarding confidentiality and use of communication and computer systems. I will tell you, you're going to use something, you'll get comfortable in some place that you work, and you'll call it at some point your office, your cubicle, your computer, right? But really, if it's Temple-owned and it's in Temple's buildings, it's really Temple's. So you should be aware of and understand the policies that Temple has for the usage of that equipment that you would use in Temple's name. That's different from your own personal laptop, which you can do whatever you want with. But I'm talking about Temple-owned and Temple equipment. Does that make sense to all of you? All right, good. So that's included in the manual. And it does, how else would you know who you can date? All right? You can learn this in the employee manual, all right? And it starts from who you cannot date, all right? That's a good place to start. And it provides important information to protect you and students and the university from discrimination and harassment. And that's really what I'm going to spend the bulk of the time talking about. This morning, you had a theatrical presentation from some colleagues of mine about some of those challenging scenarios that might come up, you know, if you're brand new to the classroom, right? But now I'm going to talk to you about policies and procedures because those are things that are important for you to know about for a couple of reasons. Because as a teaching assistant or a graduate assistant, you now represent Temple. You're in the front of the room and students are looking at you and they're seeing you as the authority or the Temple representative. And because of that, that's one of the reasons that we want you to share these policies and procedures with you. All of you were given a document. You're going to be following it along as we go. There we go. I'm going to be asking you some questions. So it's a 2-sided document that you were given, or maybe it's 2 pages. It has some true-false questions on side 1, and then on the second side, it has some judgment things, some particular scenarios that you're going to be asked to discuss. So what we're going to be doing is, as I go through the slides, I'm going to be asking you for responses to the true-false questions. And on the back side, what I'd like you to do is, as I'm going along, because I know every one of you in this room feels comfortable multitasking, what I'd like you to also do is look at the second side, which outlines certain scenarios. Please, as you look at those, if there are any of those that you would like me to respond to from a policy perspective about how you or someone else would handle those in the classroom, please ask those questions, all right? So, again, we require that every new faculty member, administrative member, and also TAs and GAs understand, learn, and know what our policies are regarding discrimination and harassment. And let's see. And these are some phone numbers for you. And I believe that the Teaching and Learning Center will make this whole PowerPoint available to you after this training program so that if you don't get a phone number, you don't get a website, don't worry. You can get access to the PowerPoint. So I said this before really briefly. Please find out if the position that you have is covered by the Temple University Graduate Student Association, which is the bargaining unit that would collectively bargain for you, your interests, because you'll know if you should find that out. And here's TUGSA's website, and here's a link to the collective bargaining agreement, the current union contract for TUGSA. Okay? So preventing and discrimination and harassment and retaliation. Temple has a policy that says in every one of its practices, in providing people an opportunity, a place to work, in providing an education, in all of those contexts, that it has an obligation to provide both a discrimination-free and a harassment-free environment to do all those things. We also say this up front to all new faculty and also to you as TAs and GAs to let you know that our policies do not curtail your right to free speech. We fully understand that in your research and in your classes, you may be discussing or teaching from a pedagogical perspective things that are of a controversial nature. And in that context, you're allowed to discuss those controversial topics, but it's outside, this particular policy does not curtail your right to do that, okay? So let's look at our first true-false question on this, all right? Illegal discrimination occurs when people are treated differently at Temple University. What do you think? Is that true? Is that false? How many people think it's true? How many people think it's false? Well, I'm going to give you the answer. It depends. Because there's certain reasons that if you treat somebody differently, that absolutely it could fall under the auspices or the umbrella of illegal discrimination or harassment. But if I have 3 TAs and GAs or GAs that are reporting to me as a department chair or as a faculty member, right? And they're all working, you know, in the classes that I teach. And one of them is a really good performer, right? And one of them is just okay at performing. And one of them is falling far below what my expectations are. Isn't it legitimate for me to relate to those individuals differently based on their performance? That's not illegal discrimination. But let's look at some things that might be considered it. So it is false, and it depends. But let's look, I'll give you some specific examples. So unlawful discrimination is treating people differently based on something called a protected class or category, or protected status. I will share those with you in just a moment, so you'll know what I'm talking about. So it's all around hiring, firing, promotions, some kind of work benefit, or exclusion, right? Around protected statuses. Let's look at them, because they're things that you're familiar with. You've probably seen these in other places, okay? So we're talking about race, color, religion, color of skin, gender, which includes pregnancy and parenting and caretaking. I'm going to focus on 2 at the end, sexual orientation, which is covered in the state of Pennsylvania and Philadelphia, even though it's still not covered federally, but that's a whole other topic of conversation, which we're not going to get into right now. Ancestry, national origin, age, disability, marital status, veteran status, and genetic information. These are the protected statuses. So if I treat you differently, if I treat the men differently than I treat the women, if I treat the people from one country outside of the United States different than I treat the people in the United States, then treating people differently could be construed as illegal discrimination. Make sense to everybody? Good. All right. Let me focus on 2 of these. You may be unaware that genetic information is a protected status. But what that might mean is if I was predisposed to have the gene for multiple sclerosis, and I was up for some kind of a promotion or a particular good opportunity for me, and the person that was considering me for that promotion somehow either informally or formally knew that I had that gene. And he or she, during that decision-making process, said, will Eric be able to handle the rigors of this job over time if he has this degenerative disease? And if I did not receive that opportunity or that promotion with that person who had that information, they would be discriminating against me based on that genetic information. That's against the law, and it's against Temple policy. The other one that I want you to know that is protected in the city of Philadelphia under the Fair Practices Ordinance is called gender identity and its expression, which means that in a work context, if I am born male or female as a sex, and I choose, and I believe I'm born in the wrong body, and I choose to outwardly identify with a gender different than the sex that I was born, I am protected in the workplace at Temple University in the city of Philadelphia for that choice, okay? And we share that with you because these things are affected, because if you discriminate against somebody who has made that choice, and it doesn't matter whether I choose to have a sex change operation or not, it could just be a decision to outwardly identify. And I want you to know that Temple includes that as a protected status in the city of Philadelphia, because the city of Philadelphia does, and it's the right thing to do. So this tells you all of the things I just said, okay? Good. I like to do that. More information, okay? So I cover slides ahead of time, but you can read this at your leisure. All right. Further, all of our personnel actions, everything we do, we say should be done without regard to protected class status. We should be making those decisions from people based on knowledge, skills, and abilities. That has nothing to do with whether you belong to a particular group. And that's the reason that we have policies like this, okay? So let me go forward. All right, good. There we go. So types of discrimination, disparate treatment, that's the one that happens most often. I treat you differently because you are a woman. I treat you differently because of your sexual orientation. I target you because of one of those things. That's disparate treatment. Disparate impact happens a lot less. It's similar to something like, it used to be an old Philadelphia Fire Department requirement that you had to be at least 6 feet tall, you had to weigh at least 180 pounds in order to be able to work for the Philadelphia Fire Department. Now this is long since gone. This was an old case that got tried and found that that was an unlawful requirement. But who might that requirement discriminate against? Women and people who are less than 6 feet tall and less than 180 pounds. And we all know that any one of those groups of people could be effective fire persons, if you will, and save lives, right? It has nothing to do with size and weight. And that's one of the reasons. And that's what disparate impact, because it had a disparate impact against that group of people for that requirement. Harassment is a form of discrimination, which we will discuss. Retaliation, again, is also part of this. I will discuss what that Temple has a retaliation-free environment. And failure to provide reasonable accommodation. So if somebody shows up in one of your classes, a student who has a physical or mental or learning disability, Temple has an obligation to at least engage in a conversation with that student about what reasonable accommodation we might be able to provide to them. Now I want to tell you that students should not be showing up in your classroom and saying, I need an extra hour to take a class, or I need more time for a paper because of a learning disability or something like that. They should be registering with the Disability Resources Services Office first. But sometimes students don't know that. Sometimes they show up in your classroom and they make the request of you and they're unaware that they need to go to Disability Resources Services first. What we want you to do as a TA or GA is to respond just like this. Well, we're certainly willing to offer you a reasonable accommodation. What we would like you to do is go to Disability Resources Services Office that's located in the lower level of Ritter Annex, that's right down the hall here. Have them go there first. They register with Disability Resources Services. They provide the correct documentation. They come back to your classroom with paperwork. It says, this is the reasonable accommodation that I'm asking for, and it comes from Disability Resources Services. So I wanted to share that process with you because it's possible they could show up to see you first. So these are the types of discrimination that could happen. So here's some examples for you. I've given you some examples, but you can take a quick look at these, and they're not brain surgery. They're things that you've probably seen before. Okay? So let's see what the next one. Claims of discrimination and harassment are on the decline. How many people think that's true? How many people think it's false? Well, all of you who said false are correct. These statistics are just a little bit old, but I will tell you that the 2011-2012 statistics mirror these. In fact, there are still large percentages. Each year there's increasing claims of discrimination in the United States that are filed with the Equal Employment Opportunity Commission. I will tell you that race used to be number one, but retaliation has now overtaken race as the particular type of discrimination claim. And these are claims that are filed with the Equal Employment Opportunity Commission, not necessarily claims that are taken on by them, but people who claim discrimination and file claims with them. So let's look at this. Conduct for this one has to be severe or pervasive as judged by a reasonable person to be considered illegal harassment. How many people think that's true? How many people think it's false? How many people have no idea? Okay, good. But what do you think? Do you think I'm going to tell you? Think I'm going to? Yeah. What do you think the next words out of my mouth are? Great. This is right. This, in fact, this is right out of the law books. This is right out of the legal text. Let's look at this. For something to be considered harassment, and harassment is a form of discrimination, all right? In order for a court of law to decide whether it is, they look at certain things. They say, first, is it quid pro quo? Anybody in the room remember their Latin? What does quid pro quo mean?
Scratch my back and I'll scratch yours.
Scratch my back and I'll scratch yours. Exactly. This for that, all right? Example of something like that is if I say something like, all of the students who have come to my class while I've been a TA, I can tell you, they've come, many of them I've asked to do some work around my yard, right? And I can tell you that most of the ones who've come to do the work around my yard have always received favorable responses from me on their test scores or their grades. What did I just do? I just said, if you come work on my house, you're more than likely going to get a good grade in my class. This for that. Quid pro quo. Make sense? Probably not realistic, but you understand the example, all right? I will tell you that there are very rarely does quid pro quo harassment happen. It's too obvious now. It happened in the 1960s. It happened with Anita Hill, you know, and Clarence Thomas. That sort of brought everything to light, and all of a sudden stuff changed. So people got a lot, they went underground, if you will. The type of harassment that happens a lot more often is hostile environment harassment, which is subtle, little things over a period of time that create an environment that is hostile to someone for a particular reason around a protected status. Okay? So every time I see somebody who is Muslim, if I make a crack, right, or an inappropriate comment about Muslim garb or Muslim dress, ultimately, if that's done over a period of time, the message that I'm sending to that individual is it's not okay to adhere to that religion. It's a hostile environment. Very often, the court of law is looking, how many times did you say what you said? Frequency. They're looking at my position, right? So you are someone as a TA or a GA that is in a position of power. You are in the front of the room, right? So if you do something that you think might be funny and your humor has to do with a protected status issue, you are in some high-risk territory, very high-risk territory. So those are the different types. Also, the behavior could either be done once and one time only, right? So if I were to use a racial epithet that we all know, something like the N-word or the F-word for someone who is a gay or something like that, those are things that more than likely, even once in a classroom, a group of reasonable people would say that that was harassing behavior. Okay? And that's what the reasonable person standard comes from. Pervasive are things that happen series of times, a series over times, constantly, regularly. As judged by a reasonable person, and it has to alter the conditions of the work or educational environment. So it has to do something that affects my ability to get my education or do my job, bless you. It includes people of the same sex, so men can harass men, women can harass women. There's nothing that says it has to be cross-gender harassment. And it's based on common sense and social context. So if I'm on the court, and I'm playing basketball, and I'm a coach, right? And I send my player into the game and I smack him on the butt or her on the butt and say, go get him, because they've hit the winning shot. That makes sense in that context, right? But if somebody gets a really good mark on a paper and I walk up and smack them on the butt, that's out of context. That doesn't make sense, does it, right? Completely different environments, okay? So you get my point. All right. So, our anti-harassment policy says that we're committed to creating and maintaining this environment at Temple University, that we will take steps to prevent harassment, correct it if we know about it, and discipline anyone who's harassing, because that's our responsibility as an institution of higher education. Harassment includes the same protected statuses. Remember, harassment is a form of discrimination, so these apply just as much to harassment. You should be aware that harassment can be electronic. Please, remember that the email is never fully private. If you wouldn't say it to your grandmother, if you wouldn't say it to your mom, if you wouldn't say it in an elevator, if you don't want it to be published in the Inquirer, the Philadelphia Daily News, don't say it on the internet. Please, please. The other thing is, be careful what you text, right? Because that is an electronic record. I always tell people that what you email, what you text, if you ever do anything wrong, you know what it turns into? Evidence. Evidence. So be careful. Remember that. Think about that, because all these things are not fully private. So be careful, because harassment can be electronic in its nature. Sexual harassment is a form of harassment that's based on sexual advances that are unwelcome. Okay? The key word here is unwelcome. So if I walk up behind one of my fellow TAs and I start to give him or her a massage on the shoulders, right? You know, yeah, I know it looks creepy, doesn't it? Okay? I get it, right? But let's say I do that, right? If the first response I got is, can you get this spot over here? That's not unwelcome, right? But if I get another response where the person sort of pulls away or gets up or moves away from me, that's a whole different story, because that's an unwelcome response, right? So again, even severe sexually harassing behavior, I'm walking down a hallway at Temple, somebody grabs a big chunk of my behind, right? Happens to be an unwelcome chunk of my behind. More than likely, a jury of reasonable people would say, oh, that only happened once, but more than likely they would say that's severe sexually harassing behavior. Make sense? So that's a particular type of harassment that we want to make you aware of. And again, it's verbal or physical contact. So it could even be threatening posture. It could even be the way that I stand. So if somebody's walking down the hallway and I put my arm out to block their pathway, and I get close to them, get in what might be considered their close physical proximity or space, that's the type of behavior that could be construed of, or at least fall into this category. All right? And I'm going to go over with you what we want you to do. So here's some examples. Okay? And there's more examples on the back side of what you're doing. Okay? So, reasonable accommodation must be offered to instructors, staff, students, and students for their religious beliefs and practices. How many people think that's true? Okay, good. Just so you know, everyone in the room should be raising their hand. Okay? That is true. Without question. I'm not even going to ask you. Because someone's religious beliefs are protected federally, and for that reason, TAs, GAs, faculty members, Temple University must respect those religious preferences and those religious choices. Okay? Which means that we don't want to, remember I talked about something like disparate impact as a type of discrimination? Let's say I give a graded exam on a Friday afternoon in December, and my class is from 3:30 to 5:30. Who might that particular time for me giving that exam have a disparate impact over? Exactly. Someone who's Jewish who recognizes the Sabbath, which starts at sundown on Friday and lasts till sundown on Saturday, right? So if I don't provide an alternative time for students of the Jewish faith to be able to take that exam, I'm going to be discriminating against them because there's a disparate impact against that group of people. Does that make sense to you all? So, if I do something, if I have a student that comes to me as a Muslim student and says, hey, your class spans over between 11 and 1 on Fridays, right? I need about 5 minutes to get out of class, because what am I going to do at noon on Fridays? I'm going to go pray, right? So what Temple would expect to do for all of you to do is to see if you could find a space nearby where it was a quiet room or a place, at least give them the opportunity or the permission to leave the class, go away for their 10-minute period of time, let them do it, and then come back. That's the kind of thing that we're talking about around religious accommodation, okay? So this just tells you that why we do it. So this is just sort of the language. I'm going to try to get through it as fast as I can, and you can read. You wouldn't have made it to be a TA or GA if you weren't smart. So I don't read slides, I let you read slides while I augment them with comments, okay? Although not legally hostile work environment, an instructor is prohibited from berating students. Is that true or is that false? True? False. All right? Well, and many of you did not raise your hand, so you're waiting for me to inform you. That's okay. That's all right. All right. I will tell you that berating, yelling, screaming, unprofessional behavior in the front of the classroom, while it may not be illegal, is considered inappropriate behavior for someone in a position of authority at Temple University. We would never expect you to do it. We wouldn't expect any of the faculty members who you work with and for to do it. We wouldn't expect any administrator to do it. I don't even care if they're an equal opportunity yeller and screamer. Oh, I don't discriminate against anybody. I yell and scream at everybody. Okay? It's still inappropriate and unprofessional behavior. That's not the type of behavior that we expect out of authority figures at Temple University. Okay? Good. All right? So bullying, this tells you that it's prohibited, even though it's does not fall under a protected status context. And it also is happens quite often. In fact, it's happening, unfortunately, more often. Do not be surprised if at some point you find bullying as, or a certain issue around protected status. That's going to change. It's already beginning to change in the legal landscape because there's emotional distress that's connected to people who are being bullied in the workplace. Consensual instructor-student dating is not against Temple policy. Yeah, you have to read it. I know. You have to read it. Ah, okay. Here, that's always the loophole question. I'm not going to find out. I'm not going to out anybody in the room at the moment for it. No. Let me say this. Sir, it deals directly with what it first considers as a direct power relationship, right? So if I'm in front of the room and I'm teaching a group of students, I'm the one that's evaluating their work, marking their papers, giving the assignments. In that context, it is absolutely prohibited to have a consensual relationship, because we don't believe that if I'm in a consensual romantic relationship with one of my students in that class, that I can remove myself and be objective about their work. Okay? That's why we consider that a conflict of interest. So let's go to the other question is, can I date a student that's not in my class? Well, remember that you do represent an authority figure at Temple University. You are a TA or a GA. You are seen in that light. And people may, even though they might not be in your class, they may know that you have that level of responsibility. You don't know if that student's ever going to be in your class in the future, do you? And yet, you might still be connected to them. I will say that if there is a consensual relationship and one of you ends up being teaching and the other ends up being a student, one of you is going to have a decision to make, because we don't think that that should happen in a classroom. The other thing I would say is, sometimes it can be high risk, right? Because you don't know what your future relationship would be. So while it may not be against our policy for you to date a student that's not in your class, that has nothing to do with you, be thoughtful about that, because it could be some high-risk behavior, okay? Anything you would add to that, Pamela, from a TAGA perspective? That I should say, or did I say, or Stephanie? Okay, all right, good. All right, good. That's good enough for me. So this tells you about consensual romantic relationships at Temple University. You should be aware of something called contra-power harassment. Was it covered this morning in the theatrical scenarios, where someone who is perceived of to have less power can harass somebody who's perceived of to have more power? So if I was teaching as a TA or GA and one of my students could harass me as a teacher, they could threaten me, they could, try to say, if you don't do what I want you to do, I'm going to scream, and claim that you touched me. Something like that. That's possible. That's called contra-power harassment. Temple can be held liable for student-to-student harassment. True? False? You're waiting for me to give you the answer. Oh, okay, I got it. All right, I'm hip now. That is true. That's one of the reasons why we do this program for you as new TAs and GAs, because you now represent the university. And because Temple can be held liable for student-to-student harassment, if you observe harassing behavior among the students, what we expect you to do is you don't solve the problem, but at the very least you tell someone else. So we're not asking you to be a lawyer. We're not asking you to know the law. We're just asking you to say, if you see somebody and you see harassing behavior, sexual harassing behavior or illegal discriminatory behavior based on protected status, we want you to tell someone else. Who might you tell? The faculty member that you work for, a department chair. You could tell somebody in the Teaching and Learning Center. What you want to do is pass that information on to somebody who's an official at Temple University, so that we, Temple University, can do something about it. Because remember, our goal is to provide a harassment and discrimination and free environment for everyone who goes to school here, everyone who works here, and everyone who teaches here. All right? Confidentiality about a complaint can be ensured if requested by complainant. Is that true? False? Well, it's tricky.
It should be confidential no matter what.
Well, that's not necessarily true. You now have a slightly different relationship with the university than you did before. It's similar to what's called an agent-principal relationship. There are some things that if students tell you, you cannot ensure confidentiality.
Oh, I see what you're saying.
Okay? Some types of things. Did you have a question or a comment?
I was going to say, shouldn't you have a right to face your accuser, or to know who your accuser is?
If an investigation is engaged upon, that is up to the Department of Equal Employment, Equal Opportunity Compliance, about whether that's a part of the investigation process, which I'll talk about in just a moment. But let's look at this. So if somebody comes up to me, and sometimes students come up to you and they preface what they're going to say. They say something like, look, I really need to talk to you about something, but I want you to promise before I tell you that you can keep this in confidence. What should your response to that be? Depends on what it is. Because if I tell you about discriminatory or harassing behavior, what did I just say to you? You have an obligation to tell someone else. The example that I use too is, if I told you that I was going to hurt myself or hurt someone else, that's also the type of information that you would share with someone else. So you have to be really clear. If somebody comes up and says, I don't want you to tell somebody else, it depends on what they tell you. Does that make sense to everybody? Good, good. All right. Faculty, staff, and students must report harassment and complaints to their supervisor, department head, chairs, or deans first. And that is true. But that's false. Supervisors, department. Faculty. Yeah, because they have to report it, but not necessarily first. Yeah, I looked at that because I thought to myself, those are all the types of people that I would tell you to report it to. Yeah, I would want you to say something, but it doesn't necessarily have to go to them first. That's the trick part of this. You could go to, and I think this is the next slide. It's coming up in a couple of seconds. So what do we want you to do? If you or you see somebody who's being harassed and you find out about it, or if it's you, what do we want you to do? One is it can be a very empowering thing, right, to tell that person or for you to say, stop doing what you're doing, right? But oftentimes people, when they're being harassed or discriminated against, they're fearful, am I right? They feel like they can't say something. And in that context, that's why they've come to talk to you. If anybody fears for their safety, they should be contacting campus police, all right? You want to keep a record of any behavior? You should keep records if somebody talks to you. Immediately report it to your manager, your manager's manager. Oh, good. This is giving you the variety. So there's no one best person. So it could be your department chair, could be the teaching and learning center. Even if you see me walking across campus, I'm an equal opportunity ombudsperson's resource individual. So you could say, hey, Eric, I remember you from the TAGA orientation. I need to tell you about something because then I could guide you about where you would go to make that complaint or to pass that information on. The Office of Equal Opportunity Compliance is located on Sullivan Hall, and that's where formal complaints will be filed. To address your question, sir, so if I went there and I filed a complaint, it's very possible that through that investigation, they might determine that they might want to get me and the person in the same room, but they might not. That's up to them as they do the investigation, okay? So we expect you to know and understand our policies, to explain our harassment policies to others, to be able to explain it, to take appropriate action, to be receptive to concerns. If people are going to talk to you about things, your students, you want to be receptive. Take appropriate action, follow up to make sure that they've been, that their complaint has been well heard and attended to, and attend training when it's required. In fact, many of you in this room will be getting an email from some place called noreply@clarity.net. It will take you to an online anti-harassment training program. You'll have to watch a 22-minute video and then answer 13 questions. You must answer all 13 questions correctly in order to successfully complete that program. Okay? Let me say this. When the video comes on, make sure that you watch the video. Don't answer your emails. Don't talk to your friends on the phone because you won't get all 13 questions right on the test. Then you have to retake the entire test all over again. It is virtually impossible to get any one of these questions wrong if you watch the 22-minute video. Okay? All right. An employee's discrimination complaint is found to be without merit is protected from retaliation. And that is true. One of the reasons that retaliation was put into law was because if you didn't protect people from filing or making complaints from retaliation, why would they ever say anything? So whether a claim is founded or unfounded, right, everyone involved with that complaint is protected from retaliation. So even if I'm somebody that's interviewed in an investigation as a third party, right, and that claim is even found not to be harassing, if the person who the complaint was filed against retaliates against me, right, on Facebook or through social media or through other means, they are retaliating against me. They are committing a crime against the law, which is against the law and against temple policy. Yes?
But that doesn't limit their legal avenues to deal with things like slander, right? So if somebody has launched a completely unfair claim against you,
right,
the legal recourse would to claim slander.
Right, right. And if it's found that for some reason I launched a claim of harassment against you, and what was found was that I lied, I falsified information, that I actually targeted you with a completely false claim, that's actually dealt with in a different context because it's not okay for me to do that. And if that were found in the investigation, then the university would take action against me for those false claims. Does that make sense to you?
Yeah. In a normal court of law, you'd also have the avenue of filing a slander suit because it's not always possible to prove that your case was absolutely unfounded.
Yeah.
But it could be very plausible that it is, in which, like, if somebody, I'm an academic, if somebody says I forged everything that I've written,
Right.
that totally destroys my credibility. I should have some avenue to say.
And you may know more about that than I do, which sounds like you probably do. And I'm glad that you're sharing this with your colleagues. No, and I'm appreciating it right now. But that's one thing I want to make really clear is I'm not a lawyer. Okay? So that I would actually depend on a legal mind for that. But it sounds like you have some good information that you're sharing with your colleagues. Yeah.
I'm not a lawyer, so I don't trust me on this absolutely, but I have a friend who got prosecuted in the UK and needed to.
Right. And I can tell you that Temple takes very seriously false claims. Okay? So if there is a false claim, a malicious false claim that is made, and we find that out, we take that very seriously. Okay? Good. So this is all around retaliation. In summary, we take action to prevent, to investigate, correct, and discipline discrimination and harassment. We'll address inappropriate behavior. All of us are responsible for our own behavior in creating a campus where diversity is valued and differences are celebrated. How did I do? Did I get done in half an hour? All right. Listen, thank you all very much. Yeah, good job.